Today is Tuesday. Doesn't feel like a Tuesday. It feels like a Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. And we wanted to, on behalf of the Canadian Securities Exchange, we wanted to welcome you to Instagram Live, a subsect of Hashtag Finance. I'm your host, Barrington Miller, and today we are going to learn about lobbying, lobbyists, cannabis, U.S. federal reg, and maybe a little bit of cooking. I'm joined here with Saphira. Saphira, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Barrington.
Where are you? Where in the world are you?
Where in the world is Saphira? Well, you find me today in southern Oklahoma, which is exactly where I know that your viewers are expecting to find me, in a small town called Ardmore, where I was reared.
What is a Washington, D.C. power lobbyist doing in southern Oklahoma?
Well, I came here for a bar mitzvah, which in itself is an oxymoron, a bar mitzvah in Oklahoma, the weekend before the quarantine hit, and kind of once things just shut down, I thought being with my parents was probably the right place to be. And as I may have mentioned, my mother has a half a cow, Butch, Jimmy, or Joe, in the freezer and toilet paper till midsummer. So I think I'm probably in a pretty good place for a while.
Well, it's good that everybody in your circle is safe, and let's hope that it continues. Let's talk. What do you do? What the Liaison Group? What's the purpose? I know I believe it is the only lobbying company firm in Washington, D.C. that is strictly for cannabis. Is that correct?
I think that's the case. You know, the cannabis industry moves so quickly that things change all the time. I can say that we have been the kind of dedicated lobbying and advocacy firm in DC, focusing exclusively on cannabis and exclusively on federal issues. There are a lot of folks that kind of dabble in lobbying generally, and cannabis is one element of their portfolio, but we do all federal policy on cannabis all the time.
How did you get into that? I know you have quite a diverse background, but what brought you there in 2016?
So I describe my career as in three chunks. I've been in DC since the late 90s, which, you know, for people who have been in DC, that's a long time because it's such a transient and people transition in and out of DC. But I started my career as a regulatory lawyer in the international telecommunications and satellite and transponder space. So I worked for France Telecom, I worked for Skynet, I worked for RIM. I don't even think you knew this about me, some Canadian company.
No. Yeah, you know what? I'm joining the viewers. I'm sitting there like this.
That's right.
This is great.
I was a poll lawyer. Yeah, a poll lawyer. For those of you who want to know, there's a practice of law for that. And then transitioned out of that into a appropriations portfolio for a Florida firm who wanted DC presence and a focus on lobbying. And so I did that, worked inside Landmine Survivors Network, which was Princess Diana's organization. And then after about a decade and a half of being traditional DC lawyer, lobbyist, I stepped off the Hill, opened a business, an arts-based business, performance arts-based business, and I opened a dance studio in Arlington, but I was a lawyer and a professional dancer. And then about 4 years ago, when I decided...
Wait, what kind of dancing?
So I'm a classical Middle Eastern dance artist. So classical belly dance, but it's Egyptian style, and we have one of the leading belly dance schools in the country, actually.
Wow.
So, but most recently, over the past 4 years, I have kind of focused both my energies and my aptitudes and my deep relationship portfolio in Washington and my experience in Capitol Hill to focus on cannabis lobbying. So since actually the December 2016 election, December the 9th to be precise, I have been dedicated 100% exclusively on advancing cannabis policy for industry stakeholders in the United States. And I wouldn't say abroad because I don't represent foreign companies, but there certainly are broad ownership interests supporting the U.S. Cannabis industry growth. So on behalf of the U.S. cannabis industry, I am in D.C. all the time working to advance that policy.
Now, let's take a step back and let's deal with some definitions. What is a lobbyist? We hear it all the time. We may know some, we may not. What does a lobbyist do? And I heard a story when I was in DC a while ago. I think it was 2 years ago. That it actually had to do with a hallway and a corridor and people stopping and trying to influence certain politicians in the lobby. But what does a lobbyist do? What's your day to day?
What is my day to day? Well,
what was your day to day? Which is a little different.
Actually, my day to day hasn't changed. It's just the channels in which I communicate are now Zoom and on the phone, which was
right.
Well. So in Washington, as folks know, advancing legislation is a very complex, dynamic, and sophisticated and multifaceted process. And if you have 535 or so, depending on how many members are sitting in congressional seats on the House and Senate, at any given time, those members are dealing with a deluge of demands, concerns, politics, and complications. And the job of the lobbyist is to understand both the big picture and the nuance of the industries and the clients that they represent, to educate, inform, advocate, and navigate the legislative process for advancing law for their specific industry. So, for example, in the cannabis world, in the US, cannabis industry stakeholders have enjoyed, specifically medical cannabis industry stakeholders, have enjoyed a protection since 2016 under the appropriations bills, the US spending bills. Well, the US spending bills is a body of bills that are renewed every single year. But the process is archaic, it is complex, it is confusing, it is political, it is so wrought with nuance that if you're not doing it every single day and you don't understand that, then you either get left out, left behind, or things that an industry or a business could have enjoyed in 1 year could be removed in the next. So the lobbyist's job is to really be a conduit between the subject matter and policy needs of an industry and the lawmakers who need information and understanding of what the implications are for not addressing those policies. So really, I liaise information between the needs of the cannabis industry and, frankly, the demands and needs of a lawmaker.
What's your clientele? Is it law firms like Greenspoon Martyr? Is it certain individuals? Is it school boards? Is it like what?
Yeah. So the Liaison Group has a portfolio of I think we're probably represented, if not in every state that has a program, probably 95% of them. We represent state industry associations. So we work on behalf of the California Cannabis Industry Association. So, 600 plus businesses, 15,000 employees. So and the delegation for California is 55 members strong, which is a very large voice in Washington. So speaking on behalf of the largest industry, right, the largest contingent, that's important. Oregon Cannabis Industry Association is also one of our clients. We represent one of the largest, if not the largest, investment firm in the space. And one of our large parts of our portfolio is our work with the National Cannabis Roundtable. The National Cannabis Roundtable is a coalition of 14 businesses, some MSOs and some smaller businesses, some ancillary businesses, and some service providers, including law firms. And we target and direct their efforts, their energies, and their expertise to educate and tell lawmakers why cannabis reform is so crucial, not just to reconcile federal and state law in the US, but at this point, release the possibilities of economic growth so the cannabis industry can be an economic engine in this crucial time.
So when we were doing this interview, I sort of had a vision of doing the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future, and when it comes to cannabis. And you've given us a little bit about the past. Where are we today? Where are you today? And how are we
So,
doing as an industry? If you want to examine it from the U.S. perspective or globally, whatever you like. But where are we?
I think it's actually, so many people ask me, when are we going to get legalization? And I always say that's the wrong question. I think what you asked, Barrington, is the right question, which is, tell me where we are on the spectrum based on where we've been and where we're going.
Yes.
And frankly, we are positioned in a very effective place. Over the past 3 years, and I'll speak from the US industry perspective, because US policymakers frankly care about the US industry more so than they do about outside the US. And if they care about the outside of the US, it's just how internal, US based companies fare and can compete relative to the outside US marketplace. So if you were to kind of whiteboard the growth of education, support, understanding, and really, champions that the industry has developed, you would see a fairly northern-facing arrow, a northwest-facing arrow in terms of improved, meaning if in 2016, when I first started lobbying on the Hill, the trajectory of interest and informed and understanding and a commitment towards advancing policy has improved greatly. So where we sit today is on the House side, we have a broad base of support in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party for comprehensive reform. I'm going to put a pin in that because the approach to reform and what they want to do first, second, or third, meaning the prioritization of reform on the House side, is where we still have some disagreement. On the Senate side, things look a little different. As many of your viewers may know, Leader McConnell comes from a state that has hemp, which was obviously legalized through the 2018 Farm Bill, but his relationship with cannabis continues to be nascent. And his concern about some of the unknown implications that could result from public health or unintended consequences is still fairly central in his political mind. He also doesn't have a large number of Republican colleagues who have joined as our champions. On the Senate side, we of course have Cory Gardner, who's advanced his support for cannabis. We have Kevin Kramer from North Dakota. We have Lisa Murkowski from Alaska. We have Mr. Daines from Montana for medical, but we don't have broad support under the Republican Party for cannabis reform. As a result, on the Senate side, he wants to go slow and maybe I wouldn't even say steady and slow. he barely wants to go. Let's just say that. So we've got this.
At least he's moving.
Well, I'm not even so sure I can call it that. Let's just say with him passing, he's at least got to like step into the cannabis sativa L. I mean, he's at least has to say the name of our plan on a regular basis. But on the House side, we've got more traction and progress. On the Senate side, we have less traction and progress. And then take all of that, Barrington, and add a COVID crisis and a global pandemic, take a White House who's navigating the politics, and then take an election cycle that overlays nuance on who's going to push forth what, who's going to prioritize what. And so all that is we have to deal with all that. It's not just cannabis. It's how cannabis fits in within the broader political, sphere. Is that confusing?
Yes.
we can parse it out. I wanted to give you kind of the 30,000-foot view, but we can parse it out and I can be more specific on things as we continue to talk.
Well, I also know that the designated leader of your country has drawn a lot of attention daily, hourly. What?
I think in the last 5 minutes, actually.
Probably. Twitter's blowing up somewhere. How does his administration That election cycle, how does and will it affect what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve?
So we know that within the administration, there are different perspectives on cannabis reform. We know that the most conservative, and not most conservative as it relates to, we'll call it libertarian ideology, or, you know, states having a lot of rights, federal government having little right or little control. Within the administration, the most conservative religious right, we can call them, that contingent, which is very, very strong. Mr. Pence has, you know, clearly introduced that faction as an influencer, as a policy influencer, yeah, is not just cannabis reluctant, but cannabis opposed. And it's a, you know, I come from the South. I come from the Rust. I come from the Rust Belt. I mean, the Bible Belt, really. And it is a fairly conservative perspective. It's the same reason why we have sheriffs in the South and religious communities in the South, and very reluctant to understand the role that cannabis plays in health and well-being of society. So that contingent is what they're putting their foot on the brake for cannabis reform. And then you have folks in the administration who understand the economic power of cannabis, and also the health and efficacy benefits that introducing cannabis as a part of our, you know, healthcare system could and will, if executed properly, you know, help with the current opioid crisis. It will change the future of medicine and personalized medicine. So we do have people in the White House who say that. And then we have folks in the White House who understand the economic opportunity of cannabis. And they're not, I wouldn't say as concerned, but they are very much got their eye on where the economics are. So you've got those three factions competing for the president's attention and competing for, you know, their perspective. But for them, cannabis is not going to win or lose an election. It's whether or not cannabis will get somebody off the couch who would not otherwise vote and vote in favor of their candidate. So it's really understanding, and that's why that's why I really complimented you on your question, that right now, if we can demonstrate, and there are a multitude, I mean, cannabis businesses are suffering like all businesses in the US.
Yes.
And there are cannabis businesses, after the designation of cannabis as an essential service in 24 states and the District of Columbia, that are actually hiring. As looking at through the lens of the cannabis industry right now, by showing the administration that yes, we've got cannabis businesses who desperately deserve access to small business loans and the payment protection program. So I want to honor and respect that. But we also have businesses that can be a part of mitigating the losses in the hospitality and restaurant industry. We have businesses who are going to be hiring, you know, more than 1,000 people in the next 90 days. And so we're in a position to be able to demonstrate that the cannabis industry is already a part of the healing and recovery of our economy.
Now, when we were speaking the first time, I think it was last week, but time seems really irrelevant over the last little bit. We did talk a little bit about legislation and legalization, and you brought up a very, very powerful point, and I'd like you to share that with our audience. And between legalization and banking,
yeah,
which one is going to win? Which one is going to pull ahead? Which one do you see as more important?
Well, I actually would like to not say a question of importance or not. I mean, for me, if I'm going to use the second question to get to the first question.
Sure.
For me, I'm a political pragmatist. What I think is the most important is what gets us towards resolving the conflict between federal and state law, and patients and consumers having access to safe medicine, and an economy being able to thrive. That is my North Star. And so the perspective from where I sit is that given the political appetite and the champions we have and don't have on either side of the Capitol, bicamerally, the House and the Senate, our chance of getting to that North Star that I just described happens first and foremost by advancing research through legislation, giving veterans access, and most importantly, giving access to banking. And that is because more politicians and more members of Congress in Washington can understand the cannabis industry through a lens of a business perspective than members of Congress who understand the industry from a more broadly complex perspective. And so we have to leverage the support that we have. So as many of your viewers know, or should know, or need to know, last year on the House side, we advanced the Safe Banking Act, which would create a safe harbor for financial institutions and insurers to be able to extend financial services to the cannabis industry and ancillary businesses. And it didn't just successfully come out of the House. It came out of the House with 2/3 vote in favor. And 321 votes later, we had a huge win on a piece of legislation that, when I started lobbying on it, didn't have a chance. And that's because of Congressman Ed Perlmutter from Colorado. He is one of the most important cannabis legislators for the entire world, frankly, because he has persistently pushed that legislation and educated congressional members. So safe banking is our best shot as of today.
So the language that's already formed in safe banking, banking in general, is a language that's understood, more easily understood.
Bipartisan, right. On the Senate side, the person who's the gatekeeper of that policy is a gentleman named Mike Crapo, who comes out of Idaho. And as your viewers may also know, Idaho is one of 3 states with no cannabis, medical, rec, anything.
Nothing.
So we've got 3,
Zero.
nothing. Got nothing. So he's a very unlikely champion for us, which means that his constituency doesn't want him to address cannabis. They don't care if he doesn't address cannabis, and there's no political implication on the negative side if he doesn't lean forward. But he's the guy we have. So I have been working with his staff and some other lobbyists, and we've got a bill text that we've introduced that he can advance cannabis banking from his perspective with his language. And we introduced it last week to him, having spoken to him since December. So hopefully we will have addressed his concerns, and we will continue to advance this policy with enough lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. So that's why banking has a play. Now we can talk about legalization, but that's why banking has traction.
Now, when you visited Toronto, I think it was last year.
Yes, it's September, I think. Yeah.
Greenspoon Murder had a small symposium, and I remember, and I'm pretty sure it was you who was talking about it, saying that the support and the push that's going to push, keep saying the word push, that's going to thrust cannabis over the line is not going to come from cannabis players. It's not going to come from the cannabis industry. It's going to be people outside and groups outside who are affected, just like Idaho, who may not feel one way or the other, but is supporting the cause. That's really what this place needs.
Yeah, you're a good listener, and you have a good memory, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I mean, the cannabis industry, we work pretty hard to keep our message strong and consistent, but just like in any effective communication, when you're thinking about who the audience is and what the message is, the right messenger between your message and the audience is crucial. So take Chairman Crapo, for example. Chairman Crapo cares much more about what the American Bankers Association and the credit unions and the insurers and the realtors and the Association of Shopping Centers, businesses and industries who are not cannabis businesses, but who are impacted by the lack of banking, which is the entire U.S. ecosystem, financial ecosystem. And so the fact that those businesses businesses. I need a clever acronym for those folks. So that's the challenge on this call today. Industries and businesses who are affected by cannabis, not having banking, but are not cannabis businesses. But that cadre of messengers, we've been organizing that group over the past year, and literally the Friday, it was either the Thursday or Friday of that COVID shut down, we had a very, like, 10 of those industry associations all in the same room, conveying to Chairman Crapo and Mr. Brown's staff, which is on the minority, the importance of advancing safe banking, and that was one of their industry association's primary priorities. So those folks have been activated, they're organized, and they have, I don't use the word aggressive, they have assertively conveyed that cannabis safe banking is a priority for them.
So nothing's really slowed down for you. No, like.
I know. And that's why, you know, when people say to me, oh, are you now doing these bills? Has your strategy changed? The truth of it is our strategy is the exact same. In lobbying, the issue is not just the policy and the politics, but it's this concept of a vehicle. So very few bills are what we call standalone bills. I mean, cannabis banking, we never expected it to advance through the House and the Senate as its standalone bill. What happens in Washington is that bills get packaged and bundled together. And so a train is leaving a station with a bunch of bills, and you want to make sure yours gets on it. So the advancement of these recent pieces of legislation to address the COVID crisis are pieces of legislation. And I'm not suggesting that the cannabis industry is looking to be opportunistic. Absolutely not. On the contrary, because the future of the health of our people and the health of our economy is correlative to our industry, we want to demonstrate how we can be part of the solution. Not just in the fact that, you know, our industry stakeholders are retooling their businesses to do hand sanitizers, or we've got a business in Chicago who's buying 900 lunches a day from restaurant workers, and hiring from the restaurant industry. These elements have to be conveyed to lawmakers that we are a part of the health of the ecosystem of our country, not just in the health and well-being of our population, but the health and well-being of our economy.
Well, I was going to move to the ghost of Christmas future, but I think I'll stay in the present. That's because that's where we're at.
Right.
Let's shift gears a bit. What do you like to cook?
Well, I will say I told my parents they're not going to let me leave because I'm cooking for them every night. So I think I shared with you that I'm on a kick for Spain because I've got a little personal interest to becoming more deft in Spanish cooking. So lots of peppers al padron, you know, the little peppers that you can you get peppers al padron, a little, I don't know what they call them here.
Well, actually, I haven't looked recently, but up until the change happened,
yeah,
yeah, you could get pretty much anything in Toronto. So
yeah, not so much in Ardmore, Oklahoma. The local Walmart does not have peppers al padron, but I can make a sofrito, which is the basis of a paella or rice dish, almost out of anything. So that's really cool. I love Mediterranean cooking. I like North African cooking. I do go to Morocco pretty frequently, and so I like to do tagines and tagieres, which is a kind of a version of a tagine, but just stewed, roasted meats with interesting sweet and savory mixed together. Couscous, yeah, that's my jam.
Well, we just had Easter. I think we're still having Easter because all I've been doing is eating.
You probably, though. I bet your Easter ran circles around my Easter.
Oh, it was. You know, close with my sister, and we practiced social distancing, and we had a food swap. So we basically pulled up to their driveway, pulled out a folding chair, put it down on the sidewalk. I walked out, put our food on the chair, went back to the car. They came, got it, went back inside, brought their food. And so between the two families, we had an enormous amount of food. And, you know, I'm not afraid to have turkey with gravy for breakfast. So that may or may not have happened today.
Listen, what happens on Instagram Live stays on
Stays
Instagram
on
Live.
Instagram Live. That's that is really true.
I feel a little like selfish that I haven't. Do we want to take any questions from folks? I don't know if folks are kind of having a background.
Yeah, a bunch of
Questions.
people have joined, and they put little waving icons. And I'm sorry, I need glasses to see, so if I don't see your name, I'm not ignoring you. I'm waving to everybody that joined, and thank you for joining. If anyone has some questions, please feel free to write. You have a valuable resource in Saphira sitting right here. So,
well, and I know that I addressed this topic from more of an esoterical perspective. I mean, I think if you're reading what's we'll call it on the in retail news and journalism, like I call that retail. That whenever you read something in the headlines, yeah. people will frequently say, "Oh, did you see this?" And I'd say, "Well, one, I was the source for it probably, or two, like that's not exactly what's happening." So I wanted to give your viewers, I kind of wanted to pull the curtains back and say there's a more complex dynamic that people need to understand when they are reading the headlines.
Oh, I'll be recording the session, and trust me, in order to understand.
Well, and I'm happy to come back if we want to like hone.
Oh, you're already. Sorry, I know I should have asked in advance, but we just assumed you were coming back.
All right. Thank you.
We have a group from Vancouver that has a session called West Coast Wednesdays, and it's hosted by Anna Sarin and Anil Mall. And I already plugged you for West Coast Wednesdays.
Great. I see a question.
Oh,
It's Wall Street care about cannabis?
Really
great question. That's a really great question. So the answer is a little bit, or at least, well, companies on Wall Street and investment bankers and the firms that who are in the business of Wall Street care about cannabis. What we really need is for, well, I don't know if you want this because this would compete with the CSE, but upon and until I think the senior exchanges in the US decide that it's a priority, we'll be fighting that battle alone. Let me give you an example. In 2016, when I started working on the banking bill in the House with Ed Perlmutter, I went to the folks in the American Bankers Association community. They did not want to have anything to do with cannabis. It wasn't legal federally. It wasn't their policy issue. They were concerned about the implications for their big banks. The small banks didn't have enough say to push their policy. And then one day they decided that for the health and safety and soundness of the economy, they wanted to pivot. And I have to compliment the ABA because they have shown not just outstanding leadership for banks, all sizes, but they've shown outstanding leadership for the entire US economy by understanding that by advancing the legislation, it's good for everyone and it's bad for no one. And so that type of leadership that the ABA, the American Bankers Association, has shown, if we can get that leadership from other folks, even on Wall Street, for example, that will help us, be messengers towards federal lawmakers on the importance of advancing this policy.
Oh, that's a great question. I personally think Wall Street cares about the business of cannabis, not so much the things that other people may care about.
Right.
That's as politically correct as I can answer that one. No, this has been great, and like I said, you're more than welcome to visit the Canadian Securities Exchange virtually anytime, either on Instagram Live or West Coast Wednesdays. Like I said, reach out to Anil Mall and Anna Sarin, or they'll reach out to you, and we'll have to do this again because I know this is just the tip of the iceberg. As far as I want to understand DC. I used to watch The West Wing and that other other thing. I don't know. I just know what I know from the movies. That's literally it. Everything I know about DC, I've learned from the movies, and that should be the title of my next book.
Well, I'm happy to translate what I know. I don't consider myself, the Washington expert, but it is definitely an interesting and entertaining and challenging and dynamic political policy, professional, legal, all of those things. And sometimes
I want a simple diagram.
oh
Starting
actually,
from, like, I have this idea that
yeah, Schoolhouse
cannabis should
Rock.
be legal,
Schoolhouse
and
Rock.
I want you to walk
Yeah.
through and draw the
Yeah.
different steps and how. There used to be these Saturday morning cartoons.
Schoolhouse Rock. I'm just a
School.
bill. I'm only a
Oh
bill.
my God, get out of my head. Yes.
I recommend that everybody watch that before our next session.
Done. Schoolhouse Rock. Wow, you just took me back. Oh,
Yep,
that's awesome.
Right? All of us. And if you don't know about Schoolhouse Rock, you're way too young.
Yes, stop listening to this. Well, on behalf of the Canadian Securities Exchange and our listeners and viewers, thank you. Thank the Liaison Group, and we wish you all the best. Stay safe, stay healthy, social distance, wash your hands, all those things. Yeah, and if somebody wants to get in touch with you or contact you, or contact the Liaison Group,
they can send emails to us. The Liaison Group at actually, you can just send them to me, Saphira at theliaisongroup.com. I don't know if I'm inviting or not. I have an outstanding chief of staff who helps me. But if you want to see what we do, the Liaison Group, and that is, I think, the French spelling LIAISON group.com, or my work with the National Cannabis Roundtable, which is the nationalcannabisroundtable.org. So you can see some of our work and reach out in that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners and viewers, for joining this Instagram Live.
Thanks so much, Barrington.
All right, take care.